Welcome to another edition of the Double A Team. I'm on the Barroom Network. I'm Ken Fang along with Stephen Negishi. And Stephen, we have an action-packed show. 2 weeks ago, we were going into the conference championship Sunday. We made our predictions. We'll talk about that in our last segment. But Stephen, a lot of things are going on. We have the Winter Olympics. We have Brian Flores. We got a lot of things going on. And plus, we have a couple of interesting guests. Tell us who we have tonight.
Okay, we booked CJ Toledano, who's a comedy writer, now a head of content with his own company out in Los Angeles. He is a big, creative lead, working and creating great sports-related comedy contents. He also attended Columbia College in Chicago. So we definitely wanted to ask him about his time in Chicago and his fandom of the NBA and what it's like to be, working in a creative field as an Asian American.
Mm-hmm. And we also have our second guest tonight, the great Derrick Ray of ESPN, NBC, called the Premier League, Bundesliga, Olympic soccer, and also World Cup. He's worked for a myriad of networks. He's one of the best voices out there, and we look forward to having Derrick on tonight.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And we have a lot of things to talk about, so let's not further delay of what we're going to discuss. Let's get right off to the bat. Of course, Chicago is an NFL city, so we have to talk about what's going on in the NFL. Let's talk about, first of all, what happened last week. First of all, Tom Brady retired, but that's not the biggest story in the National Football League. He retired last Tuesday, I believe. And then all of a sudden, a few hours later, everyone's saying, well, that's the biggest story. It's going to be the biggest story for this week. And then all of a sudden, Brian Flores said, here, hold my beer. I have something to tell you about. And he sued the National Football League in regards to its hiring practices for coaches, basically alleging that the Rooney Rule which is supposed to have minority candidates be interviewed for jobs before the hiring process, the actual hiring of a coach. He basically said it was a whole sham, and it was based on an email from Bill Belichick to another Brian Daboll, who is now the coach of the New York Football Giants. Stephen, this is an explosive story. It is coming out. It's fluid. Brian, if you saw the lawsuit and you saw the paperwork in regards to it, it makes a lot of explosive allegations in regards to this, also against Stephen Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, in regards to allegedly tanking games for first-round draft picks in exchange for a bonus or multiple bonuses. And then, of course, the NFL is now hitting back. Stephen, your reaction to this whole thing and what's been going on and what is, as we mentioned, is a fluid situation.
Yeah, Brian Flores is literally risking his, career on the line. It's basically Colin Kaepernick moment, except this is a coach who is taking a stand against the sham hiring practice, I should say. And I give Brian Flores a lot of credit for, standing up for, again, the system, the Rooney Rule that doesn't really work for what it was intended to when it was implemented. And, late tonight, Houston Texans hired Lovie Smith as the head coach, which the Bears fans are still, a lot of us are very much fond of. But at the same time, then Mike McDaniel, who got hired by the Dolphins yesterday, he is biracial, but overall, the Bears included, the coaching candidates, the coaches who got hired were overwhelmingly white. The Bears obviously can make a counter argument that Ryan Poles, who was hired as a general manager, was, African American. But it's an explosive story. Brian Flores really going all in with the story about how Stephen Ross, the owner, was going to give him $100,000 every time they lost back in 2019 when they were tanking so that they could draft a quarterback. That 2020 draft, you had Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, and Justin Herbert. And ironically, despite picking, fifth overall, they ended up taking Tua, and so far he hasn't really been, what many expect them out to be. Although, in fairness, he's been a victim of Brian Flores' handling of the quarterback situation, as well as the multiple offensive coordinator that they have gone through. So, but early on, a lot of Bears fans were interested in Brian Flores as a legitimate Bears, head coaching candidate, and they did interview him. But there were a lot of, stuff that was coming out of there, how he was a control freak and all the negative stuff early on, and why it led to his firing. Now that I look back, I can perhaps 100% concur that maybe, he was given a raw deal. And, it's good for him to stand up, even if he never gets to coach in the NFL, much like Colin Kaepernick never, got to play in the NFL again. You have to give it to him for taking a stand on the first day of, African-American History Month.
It's a fluid situation, as we mentioned. As you said, Stephen, he may have cost himself a coaching career in the National Football League. But at the same time, Flores said, especially in an interview with CBS this morning with Gayle King, is that he is risking something for something he believes in and wants to stand up for it. We know that the NFL will protect its own. There was a report that came out earlier today on Pro Football Talk that a Washington, D.C. radio station stood by its reporting of a written report about the Washington football team owner, or we should call them the Washington Commodores now, as they're called, or as some people may call them when they have a long losing streak, the Washington Commies. We should be interested in seeing when that happens. But right. Mentioning about a written report that the National Football League was supposed to get in regards to the behavior about Daniel Snyder. The report recommended that he be forced to sell the team. However, that report was never sent to the National Football League because Commissioner Roger Goodell, knowing that report would somehow get leaked, just instead wanted an oral report. So somehow that report is going to get released somehow. I think the radio station has a hand on it. It got leaked to them. It was never sent to the NFL. But we know that they protect their own. I don't think anything's going to happen to Stephen Ross, even though he should be forced to sell the team in regards to the gambling aspect, in regards to the alleged attempt to tank games, Stephen. So this is something that I think is very fluid, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how Goodell treats this week, because he has a State of the League address coming up later this week. And I'm sure he's going to be asked a lot of questions by reporters right before the Super Bowl. I think that State of the League address is either Thursday or Friday of this week. I'll be interested in watching that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Roger cannot dodge this and give a half-assed statement regarding this matter. It's an explosive issue. The fact that Colin Kaepernick happened under his watch, and now Brian Flores' situation happened under his watch. Mm-hmm. There cannot be any collusion. There cannot be any a collusion amongst the 32 owners, 31 of them old white guys, with the exception of Shad Khan, of course, in Jacksonville. So you can't find any sort of diversity, and the sham that they're promoting, with the end racism and the end zone and the stickers, that obviously they don't practice what they preach to a lot of degrees. And it's a moment in time where NFL must really, really confront themselves with this matter. And quite frankly, adding more minority owners probably won't change the problems, unfortunately. But I think you have to have a lot of diversity. And if you're going to have if you want a lot of diversity, you got to be able to start in that area. I know Denver Broncos is on sale. The late Pat Bowlen died, and his family's looking to unload. And I know I forgot the name of the gentleman, but one of the top candidates for the buyer happens to be an African American businessman. So that bears watching,
right?
As well. The Saints earlier tonight hired Dennis Allen, who was their longtime defensive coordinator. But they went through multiple candidates, including, I believe, Aaron Glenn, who was the Lions DC coordinator who worked in the Saints organization until last year. But, if you're going to promote him from within, why go through that sham interviews? The Vikings went through 9 hours with Giants DC Patrick Graham. 9 hours. And then they ended up hiring Kevin O'Connell, apparently. So something really doesn't add up. And, obviously, like I said earlier, February being, Black History Month. I said African American History Month, so I wanted to apologize for that. But it is a Black History Month. So, it's a huge, huge risk and a gamble by Brian Flores to, to speak up on this matter on the very first day. And, it bears watching, because I'm sure that, he's not BSing about the money that he was offered from, Stephen Ross. I think it does add credibility to it. So, we better keep an eye out on this issue going forward. And like you said, on the State of the Union, State of the NFL address, what does Roger Goodell do?
That's a good question. I will say that Brian Flores has hired some very good lawyers, some attack dogs that are very used to suing large organizations. The National Football League has a very bad history in court. It lost, even though it only had to pay $3 to the USFL. It did lose that case, being, as Howard Cosell used to say, the NFL is a duly adjudicated illegal monopoly. It also lost the case against Al Davis in regards to moving the Raiders, trying to prevent the Raiders from moving from Oakland to Los Angeles back in the 1980s. So it doesn't have a very good history in court. They know they don't want to see their owners deposed. They will fight this all the way. But Stephen, we'll make this the last thing before we move on to our next topic, but which will also be NFL related. But let's just, as I mentioned, very fluid. I keep saying this, but it's going to keep changing, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this in 2 weeks' time.
Absolutely. It's the early stages. We'll see. Will NFL be the last one standing, or will Flores and his legal team have the enough legs to go all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary for this one?
The other topic that was NFL related is something in regards to the AAPI community. It is former San Francisco Giants and, I hate to say, Cleveland Browns quarterback Jeff Garcia.
The 49ers quarterback.
49ers. He also was on the Browns as well.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Jeff Garcia made an attack against Mina Kimes. We've criticized Mina Kimes before, but we have to come to her defense on this one. Jeff Garcia came out against Kimes in regards to some comments that she made, and Garcia, using the old tired defense, she's never played football, so what does she know? Not thinking, of course, most of the writers that follow the National Football League haven't played the game, or announcers haven't played the game. People like Al Michaels and Bob Costas and Kevin Harlan, who are revered announcers, and people who have written about the game, like Mike Florio, have never played it, but yet seem to be getting a pass. But Mina Kimes does not, because she's a woman. Your thoughts, Stephen?
No, absolutely. I think Garcia has no business, attacking Mina Kimes. Mina has worked hard to earn her status where she is right now. Ken and I, obviously, full disclosure, in our very first debut show, when we had Mikey Chan from the Irish Wire, all three of us were very, very critical of Mina maybe not voicing enough against the AAPI racism and all that, if you remember. But this is obviously, we can separate the two issues. Just because we were critical towards Mina, for that matter, doesn't mean that I'm going to turn a blind eye on, someone like Jeff Garcia attacking her, with no, basis or no merits. She, like I said, she worked hard to get to where she is. So what, so what if she didn't play football? A lot of people, Ken and I, of course, we're doing our show. We never played any organized sports. A lot of, sports talk radios and talk show hosts that you see on television every day. Now, many of them, with the exception of very few people, have played, any sports. Maybe they might have played sport, football up until maybe high school level or even college. And, they became writers, beat reporters or columnists. So obviously they do have a different viewpoints, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the right to have an opinion on that matter. And I find it really, really interesting that when push came to shove, Garcia offered a very, very pathetic apologies, or really, really got defensive. I have a clip that I sent to our producer, Aldo Gandia, that Jeff Garcia was being interviewed by 95.7 The Fan up in the Bay Area. Aldo, I hope you don't mind playing that clip that I sent you a little bit there.
Well, first of all, I don't owe anybody an apology for my beliefs and my experience at playing the quarterback position, the difficulty of that position, the expectation on that position, how qualified you have to be one of 32 starters in the National Football League from a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint. People want to comment and tear down individuals based upon statistics. The only statistic that really matters right now is, are you winning games or are you losing games? There was nothing sexist about what I had to say outside of the fact that, yes, women don't play professional football. There are women that do participate in football. But had it been a man saying the same thing, I would have had the same response for that man who has never stood in the pocket, who has never delivered a touchdown pass, who's never taken a hit to the head while trying to make a play from within the pocket. And to be able to sit there and criticize someone at the level that Jimmy Garoppolo is at the level of any of these quarterbacks are at the level that I played at, and say that it was sexist, misogynistic. People wanted to say there's racism behind it. People want to break me down as a player. Whatever you think, whatever you want to say, doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, and there you go. It's one thing to, I understand. I try to, in my job, try to assume positive intent. I don't think there was any positive intent there by Jeff Garcia trying to double down on what he said. Really, it really wasn't really much of an apology at all. In fact, it was no apology. But no. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I really can't give him the benefit of the doubt here when you're coming out. You're first coming out saying that what you did against Mina Kimes, and sure, you can disagree with what she said about Jimmy Garoppolo, but I think 90% of the country, or 95% of the country, aside from the Bay Area, maybe even a lot of people in the Bay Area, will agree with what she said.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that comment that he said that we saw, had it been a man, he would have said the same thing. Okay. Has he gone after Stephen A? Has he gone after, Skip Bayless? The guys who've never played football? Stephen A actually came into her defense along with Molly Karam, the host on the show First Take. They were the very few people who actually voiced support for Mina Kimes. And I do believe Dan Orlovsky, who is her colleague on NFL Live on a regular basis, also came out and supported along with Marcus Spears. But, Jeff Garcia certainly, made a fool out of himself. And I actually called in ESPN 1000 because Carmen and Yurko, because they were talking about the Flores situation. And I actually have a clip of my phone call when I had a conversation with Carmen DeFalco.
Steven is in Columbus on ESPN 1000. Hey, Steven.
How you guys doing?
Okay.
So, I'm sure you know, no one on the station probably touched on this about Jeff Garcia going after Mina Kimes is, you know, women shouldn't be talking about football and all that nonsense last week in the midst of, you know, fine playoff games that just kind of got lost in the shuffle. I told Merkin, the problem the NFL faces when it comes to racial inequality and injustice is very much the issue that this country is very much facing. I know you had a white gentleman from a corporate world talking about how big of a loss it is. But, you know, there are, you know, white people out there who are very much feeling very much insecure and angry about all the racial inequality and justice. And I'm touching what happened with Mina because nobody in the media world, with the exception of very few people, are talking about this.
Jeff Garcia, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'll be honest with you. I mean, Jeff Garcia.
Jeff Garcia went after her, yeah.
I have no idea. Yeah. I didn't know Jeff Garcia was anywhere to speak. I mean, I didn't even know Jeff Garcia had a forum. I'm sorry, I have no idea.
Well, he went on Twitter, Carm.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
He went on Twitter. She was going after Jimmy Garoppolo, and he defended Jimmy Garoppolo and the fact and the way that he ends up winning games and his win percentage and stuff like that. And then, you know, went about the business of saying, what does Mina Kimes know about football?
Okay.
The tweets are out. You know, it was on Twitter where idiots go to play.
Yeah, Stephen. I mean, we did not neglect it on purpose. I swear to you, I had no. This is the first time hearing of it, so I had no idea. But okay, that's silly. We know that's a silly.
Yeah,
Good on you for calling that out, Stephen. And it is, of course, sports is hyper local, so I'm not surprised that the host in Chicago didn't hear about that. But as you mentioned, didn't get a lot of play outside of media circles. We at Awful Announcing, of course, were on top of it. And of course, there were people, of course, it got big play in the Bay Area because Jeff Garcia was the former quarterback of the 49ers there. But still, I'm glad for you to make that comments and calling that out. A good call out by you, Stephen.
Thank you, Ken. For those who don't know, Ken is a associate editor with the sports blog Awful Announcing. The reason I called is it's just basically if the media is going to call out about the issue about Brian Flores, that we began with, then the media has to know about, you know, the misogyny that Mina Kimes is facing. Look, I didn't call that show to, you know, attack Carmen per se at all. Okay. I want to make sure of that because I know a lot of listeners of this show, as well as the Barroom Network, have called in or listened to 670 The Score and ESPN Chicago for many, many years. So obviously they have a preference or bias towards a certain host, and I understand that. I want to add one more thing. Back 4 years ago or so, when the Dodgers played the Astros, Ken, you might remember Astros Eunice Gurriel did the slant eye controversy to Yu Darvish, who was traded from the Rangers to Dodgers in the mid-season trade. And I actually called Carmen and Yurko again, and I told them, you guys aren't talking about this, and obviously, they weren't fully aware of that, and I do remember Carmen saying we were not told by the management not to talk about this or anything like that. So there's this bit of a discrepancy that I wouldn't want to call it the ignorance, but if you're going to call out about the issue of Brian Flores, then you need to be more mindful about the bias and the sexism that exists in the media if you're going to talk about it, because obviously it doesn't add credibility about them bemoaning about Brian Flores and the hiring practices and how Rooney Rule really doesn't serve its purpose when Mina Kimes is being attacked because she didn't play organized sports.
Having been a guest of several sports radio stations across the country, not in Chicago, of course, but I think one of the better sports radio hosts is Chad Dukes, which is on 106.7 out in Washington, D.C. Every time I talk with him, very does his homework, asks the great questions, and whether he's talking about mixed martial arts, whether he's talking about entertainment, sports media, the Washington football team, the Washington Nationals, he does his homework, and you appreciate someone like that when you become a guest on there, and he's not asking silly narrative, try to fit his own narrative. He's always there to ask questions that he really, and he feels that the listeners want to know about, and I appreciate something like that. I understand, however, sports is all hyper local, so I kind of understand why your host that you talked to didn't know about it, but he should have known about it. So I'm glad that you good call out by you, Stephen. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Ken. Moving on to the next
subject. Oh, sorry, you have one more thing. Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead. We were going to talk about the Winter Olympics that finally.
Yes, started. Of course, the Winter Olympics have begun. They started last week in Beijing, in the People's Republic of China, the PRC, as some people know it, run by the Communist. Of course, the PRC run by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. And that's what I will be calling the either I will be saying PRC or CCP quite a bit in regards to China. The ratings for the first night of the Olympics was the lowest in history for the Winter Olympics. Only 7.7 million people watched. The opening ceremony on Friday was the lowest in quite some time, right below the opening ceremony in Pyongyang 4 years ago in the Republic of Korea, and now we're seeing issues all over the place. I'm not watching. I'm not listing the Olympics in awful announcings, viewing picks. Stephen, have you watched any of the Olympics since it began?
Not much, to be honest with you. We had Professor Jules Boykoff, a noted Olympic critic, on our show. And, we barely had enough time between the Tokyo Olympics, which pushed back from its original date to the summer of last year. And now about 6-7 months later, we have the Winter Olympics. So there's definitely a fatigue in that. I remember talking to my colleague, who's not a sports fan, by the way. I talked to him about the Olympics, and this really kind of stuck to me, what he said. He hates the melodrama that, the NBC were enforcing on the viewers per se. Yeah. And I did kind of understand that. Look, the athletes obviously are not at fault. Neither are their families who've made hard sacrifices. So, we're not crapping on their efforts and what they have done. In many, many ways, they've been, caught between rock and hard places between the IOC and the China and, the boycotts and, diplomatic boycotts and everything to say. And, the opening ceremony by IOC Chairman Thomas Bach, which Dan Wetzel of Yahoo called it a propaganda written by Chinese government. And I couldn't agree more, And I spoke about this back when we had Professor Boykoff. Pretty soon the Olympics and, the World Cup and all those global sports are only going to be held by Asian countries like China and then, Japan or any other places, which obviously has a terrible history when it comes to human rights and women's inequality per se. And, the governing bodies of these sports organizations are just basically going for the ride, which kind of embarrasses me, and it angers many, many people pretty much, deep inside. And we also talked about, Peng Shuai, who is the Chinese tennis star who accused one of the high-ranking Chinese government officials of sexual harassment and had been kind of banished for quite some time up until last week when, she was given an interview. But obviously, we all know that that's kind of somewhat of a sham with the Chinese, media or the government skimming through questions and having the official stand in for the interview, for translating purposes. But, the whole thing obviously doesn't really interest me at all.
Mm-hmm. One thing that occurred during the opening ceremony, the Olympic flame was lit by what was reported to be an ethnic Uyghur,
Yes.
And of course we know about the ethnic Uyghurs being basically being put under an ethnic genocide by the Chinese government. They've been criticized. The CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, has been criticized. The government has been criticized for human rights violations on the Uyghurs. But for them to have a Uyghur come out and say, "Hey, look, here's an ethnic Uyghur lighting the flame," but what's interesting is that this person has disappeared. We don't know where this person is, and we don't know where they are. So it's interesting how the China tries to say, "Hey, look, we're not that bad. We're trying to show that we are actually good to the Uyghurs by having a person of Uyghur ethnicity like the Olympic flame," but at the same time, it's trying to brush this whole issue under the rug.
No, absolutely. Doing that obviously only ironically inflames the anger from international community, and it doesn't really help anybody, and certainly it doesn't help the image of China. So, I'll be interested to see where this Olympics go until the 20th. So we got about less than 2 weeks to go.
Yep. And you mentioned Peng Shuai, who is the tennis player who has been missing. And of course, as you mentioned, accused a Chinese government official of sexual assault. She has come out since then on Chinese social media and also official government channels, saying that she did not mean it. It was an excessive misunderstanding. No one from the Women's Tennis Association or her fellow players have been able to independently contact or independently confirm all this information. The IOC plans to parade out her at several official events, along with former swimmer Kirsty Coventry, I should say. Coventry is the Rhode Island pronunciation. My apologies for bringing my Rhode Island native pronunciation, but Kirsty Coventry, an Olympic swimmer from Zimbabwe. They're going to have her sit with Kirsty at several events, and it was going to be like the IOC saying, "Oh, we are fine. Peng Shuai is fine." Again, trying to sweep the whole issue under the rug and trying to say that, "Oh no, you've been able to contact Peng Shuai even though she's still under house arrest."
Yeah, it's a sham. Like I said, it's something that people can look through the whole charade, and that hopefully people aren't going to, maybe except for the several, IOC idiots, people will see through the propaganda that the Republic of China is trying to pull through in these international sporting events.
Absolutely. We'll be going. We had an action-packed first segment, Stephen. We had a lot of things we wanted to discuss, and we'll have more to discuss in our last segment. But we're going to have a guest coming up in our next segment. And Stephen, we look forward to having CJ Toledano coming in, and we will have that coming up after a break.
The past year has seen a 1,900% rise in anti-Asian hate crime in New York City alone, with 2,800 incidents reported across 47 states and Washington, D.C. This is a national crisis, and we need your help to call it out. Call it a crime. Call it what it is: racism. Let's stand up together against hate. Learn more at stopaapihate.org.
We're back with the AA team, Ken Fang, along with Stephen Negishi. Stephen, let's bring in our first guest tonight.
All right. We have CJ Toledano, who used to be a writer at Bleacher Report, also wrote for The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, and now he is the the founder and creator of Follow Through, his own media studio in Los Angeles. CJ, how are you tonight?
Hey, Ken, Steven, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming to our show tonight.
Of course.
Great to have you on, CJ. A lot of things to ask you. As someone who's a late night fan, love to talk about this stuff about Jimmy Fallon. But Steven, I know you have some questions. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate it. CJ, you used to live in Chicago, having attended Columbia College in Chicago, which is obviously a college in Chicago that is slanted towards more media related.
Yep.
What was that experience like? What was that experience like, attending and living in Chicago around that time?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, and it might not be the what everyone wants to hear, but Columbia College was simply a school that I could get into that got me to Chicago. I had read about them. They had a film and TV department, and I was always, intrigued and interested in, wanting to make media, whether it was from live performing, whether it was from writing for television, being on television, writing and directing movies. So I was like, you know what, if I have to go to school, which my parents, urged me, being immigrants coming to America, this is the land of opportunity. If you're not going to become a doctor, you got to keep pursuing education. So I was like, you know what, it'll get me out of my hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania, and it'll get me to a big city, Chicago, which had all the arts. It was great. Honestly, Chicago itself was great. I think Columbia is a great school for anyone who even has just a small interest in pursuing a career in entertainment. They have, the facilities and the equipment to go out and make stuff on your own. But Chicago itself just has a great theater scene. At the time, they had Second City, they had IO, Annoyance, and it was all about, enrolling in comedy classes and performing stand-up comedy at all the local bars and theaters in town. So I think it's really the formative years of my life and my career.
And of course, Chicago, has great traditions in improv. Of course, Second City and the Groundlings and all that stuff. So, CJ, you came right into the town, which is pretty much known for that.
Yeah, I think it was like my senior year of high school, and I grew up on SNL, on Conan, Letterman, just being a huge comedy fan, and I'd read in an SNL book that a lot of the people getting hired for those shows were in Second City. It was either, an Ivy League school or Second City. And I had a better chance of paying to be enrolled in Second City than getting into an Ivy League school. So I just saw it as, a place to learn and meet people and just get those reps to making a career in comedy.
Mm-hmm. And comedy, of course, is one of those careers which, you're starving all the time, but you're always working late, working well into 2 a.m., getting up at 11 a.m., a lot of self-loathing, but still, it's one of those careers when you make it big. It's like it's like that high when you're on the stage and you hit that joke that hits it out of the park. There's probably no feeling like it.
Yeah, I mean, my wife is a comedian as well, and we're not famous by any means, but we do make a living doing it, and it's very much worth it. It's like I look at my coworkers and the people that we collaborate with, and I'm grateful every day that I'm like, these are some of the most creative and passionate people that I've ever met. These are, people who had those dreams and took a huge gamble and risk. And lived those years that turned into decades of just not making any money. And then when you can finally say you're doing it for a living, and you're really just genuinely interested in what every day is going to bring, like that's worth any salary that I can get for it. And so far so good. And of course, with podcasts and streamers and web and digital and all that, like there's more opportunities out there that who knows what a career in comedy really is. It can mean so many different things.
Absolutely. So I mentioned you used to be a writer for The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you a writer for the staff there, and what was it like to work with Jimmy? Because Jimmy gets a lot of bad rap, for being somewhat, some people say, over jealous or overreactive, with the fake laughs and all that kind of stuff. You hear about, when he's on the show, and there's some validity to it. But has somebody who worked closely with him, what is something that we don't know about Jimmy that I think people should know about?
Yeah. Okay. Let's. I want to answer this very honestly. I have no real connection to the show anymore. I was a young writer. I was 23, turning 24 at the time, and I think a lot of late night writers will say this as well. You have minimal contact with the host. And here's the thing of and this is maturity speaking too. Is of course these are celebrities. They have to talk to other celebrities every day. Their hours are crazy. They have to go out after the show and party and, keep those relationships and socialize with Hollywood. Right. And so,
right.
There were times where he had bad days and he didn't want to talk to a 23, 24-year-old writer. And that happened to me. It happens to everybody. It happens to some of the most successful late night writers in the game. And that was a little bit of my experience, and that was my first big job in entertainment. And it was a wake-up call, and it was also a great learning experience. It's in that moment, I remember, and it took a few years after I had left there to be like, how come that didn't work out? How come I'm not, there long-term, right? And I just wasn't prepared for the politics, for the competition against people. Not against, it wasn't as collaborative as I wished it would be. I was a little bit naive, and that's like most entertainment, most workplaces, it's competitive, and there are people who, figure out the game, and that becomes what the job is. It's navigating the game, like, oh, how am I getting my jokes and my material seen by the host most, or am I becoming best friends with the head writer, and is my stuff being, prioritized over this young writer? Not to say any specific moments where that was happening to me, but it definitely exists. And I think, honestly, this might be too inside, but, there's always constantly battles and movements, and this is why, there are there's a union, there's protests, there's, a push for change, because sometimes voices are minimalized, whether that's from age, race, or class. And that, for that to be my first job in entertainment, it was definitely eye-opening. And, it was, I'm so grateful for that being one of my first things, because it set precedent, and it set just a foundation for what I was in store for the rest of my career.
One of the criticisms of some of late night programming, especially in the writer's room, is that it wasn't diverse. Did you find that situation when you were at the Tonight Show?
Absolutely. I mean, I was the only Asian writer. If I'm correct, I was the only Asian writer in the show's history at that time. And then even just keeping tabs on it over the following years, there was only one or two Asian writers max. And it was always, and it's still talked about this way, where it's like, oh, we have an Asian writer. It's like, listen to that sentence. You have you have one Asian writer. And then it's like,
right.
We're diverse. We're diversifying our staff. It's like the fact that that's like so intentional of we have one Asian writer, there's still progress to be made. Of course, everyone should be hired, because they're funny. But it's we're not making progress, or it's not. It hasn't come a long way if there's not more than one Asian writer. Because off the top of my head, I can name 100 funny Asian people that deserve to write on late night, deserve to be on the show as performers, or have their own shows. America has a large Asian population. How come our media doesn't look that way?
Exactly.
Right.
The only person I can think of who's on TV, who's a writer, is Karen Chi, the writer for The Late Night with Seth Meyers. That's the closest one I can think of.
She's great.
Very funny.
I just know her from Twitter. I've been a fan of hers. Whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
She kind of came on my radar when she started writing for Seth, and I started following her on Twitter, and she's great.
She's also appears quite a bit on the NPR show Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, as a writer, and very, very funny person. You can tell when she has a joke, and she's right on top of it. And we certainly want to hear more Asian voices, especially on late night, as you mentioned, CJ, because this is a melting pot, and we need to see more Asian faces on TV, not just as a token hire.
Absolutely. And there's been some progress, and it's so funny because I think when people are stereotyping Asians, and they say that they should be doctors, or they're doctors or lawyers, and stuff like that. And it's like, here's the thing: I had immigrant parents who, again, like, wanted me to become a doctor, and so I remember my dad having a heart-to-heart with him and being like, you can be whatever you want as long as you treat it like medical school. And so I said, I'm going to treat comedy like medical school. I was going to put in the hours, and that's always my advice to anybody is, I'm going to put in the amount of, weight and commitment and hours as what it would be to go to medical school. So I definitely still, that stereotype is real. But I just decided to apply it to comedy and entertainment.
What's the t-shirt that you're wearing? Is that a Michael Jordan t-shirt?
This is a Michael Jordan golf tournament shirt. I have one of my big hobbies is collecting vintage sportswear and obscure sports memorabilia. So
that is amazing. That is awesome. I wanted to kind of throw in a little bit of a curveball here.
Sure.
Both of us, we all know Aquafina, who's a rapper, comedian, and she recently left Twitter after her criticism of, I guess, the black voice explanation. You're a comedian, obviously. You lived in New York. You work in an industry that Asian people are very much marginalized in that field. What are your thoughts on the criticism that she received and the somewhat of a non-apology that she put up on her Twitter before she went away?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot ever since sort of the criticism as started surfacing. And what's unfortunate is the non-apology that you had mentioned, right? I think we're all human and we all make mistakes, and I think it's admittance, and it's what your actions are afterwards. And unfortunately, when I had read her apology, I just, like you said, it was sort of a non-apology. I didn't read sorry in there. It seemed a little bit more like a defense. And, I'm not, there was a clip that was sort of going viral where she was also saying it was complicated and whatnot. And I agree with her. I think it is complicated. I think, you grow up in a community, and maybe, your friends talk that way, or what you're exposed to on television, what you're a fan of. If you're a fan of hip hop and Black culture, like, I can see why, you can start to speak that way. And, and I think it's understanding that and explaining why she may have had, the Black scent. But what it came down to me that disappointed me was just the non-apology and the, listen, here's what I'm going to do. If I built a career off of Black culture, I want to give back to Black culture. Here's what I want to do. And unfortunately, I didn't see that in the apology. And I hope, she does it. And I don't think it needs to be publicized. I think, like, I have friends, friends who are friends with her, and they're great people. And they said that she's great. And I believe them. And I hope that her recovery from this isn't to get the acceptance and, be like, oh yeah, I understand why you did this. I think it's, at this point, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to do it for the rehab of my own image. I'm going to do it because I believe that I owe something to Black culture. And I just feel like that would be my advice to a lot of what people are calling cancel culture is, listen, times have changed. Some things are being called out and saying it's not okay. People make mistakes, but it's what you're going to do going forward. And I think that's what people need to focus on after, these things are done.
Good call out by both of you on that one, because as much as we try to defend the AAPI community here, we also call it out for bad behavior. And CJ, great call out. Stephen, great call out by both of you gentlemen, because we have to talk real here, and I'm glad that we're doing that here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the honesty on this matter, CJ. I want to talk to you about, you created your own creative agency. Tell me what led to starting that agency, and what is the most proud accomplishment you've done? Because you've been only 1 year?
A little over a year now.
The agency, correct?
Yeah. So it's funny. My career took a little bit of a turn where sports creative and sports entertainment became a large focus at a lot of professional teams, leagues, and brands, especially in the social media age, started focusing on. And so I was sought out because of my TV experience and just the reputation of being a huge fan of sports. And so that landed me at Bleacher Report and the NFL, back to Bleacher Report at House of Highlights. And then after those years of just sort of putting myself through creative boot camp as a writer, producer, and director, my name started, to grow, and more places wanted to work with me. I said to myself, you know what, I'm passionate about this. I think this is a for real void that needs to be filled in our industry. And if I'm being perceived as one of the experts, why not start my own thing? Because one, I know other creatives out there who are passionate about sports, but we all think, oh, we're not athletic or we can't play pro sports. Sports, as a career isn't a reality for me. And the thing is, we're finding that out that it absolutely is, from being a podcaster, from being a writer and director and making those sports, whether it's, highlight reels or packages or sports movies or TV shows. One of the most popular TV shows right now is Ted Lasso. One of the greatest documentaries of all time is Hoop Dreams. Like, sports is simply, I think, a catalyst for real stories from real people, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's a game, right? But it reveals people and their character, from determination, from what they have to overcome. And physicality is only 50% of it. I think it's mental. And there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of comedy. And I just was really combining my skills and my background in comedy and entertainment and the understanding of pop culture and the zeitgeist, that with the backing of a pretty reputable studio out here in LA called Conscious Minds, I had pitched them this idea, and we said, let's just go for it. Let's see what we can do. And so grateful that people are so, one, interested and want to learn more about it and hear more about it. And then it goes into all right, let's make a show. And so we've made shows with Bleacher Report and with the NFL and Jordan Brand, which I would say Jordan Brand. We did a series called Take It From LA, which is a docuseries about untold basketball stories in cities all over the world. The first season was with in LA. And my team, we did the creative, and we collaborated with Jordan Brand, and I directed the whole series, hosted by Jordan Liggins. Fantastic talent. And yeah, it's really just putting a spotlight on, athletes are really just evaluated based on, their stat line, right? And so I was like, but these are human beings. So let's find those stories that make each of them unique.
CJ, as someone who knows about content and also writing, and content is king, as we all know in this streaming world, what are some of the ideas and some of the pitches that you have to think of and to try to keep your agency fresh and also trying to create that content?
Yeah, I think it's finding voices out there. It's finding voices out there that are, I think in the past few decades, a lot of people out there or a lot of the successful people out there, and what we see every day are the talking heads who talk about, again, the numbers, or it's all math. It's all, this player averaged this amount, and they deserve this, and money and blah, blah, and all that. And to me, it's like, who are the people that are really, one, have their own unique perspective on sports and stories, or have really fun, entertaining takes, I think it's being the home for that is like we will take untraditional talent and work with them and figure out, the best way, the best platform for them. I think it's, one thing I learned from Bleacher Report was how do we echo the fan sentiment, right? Like we all talk about sports. Like the most fun way we talk about sports is when we're in our living room with a bunch of buddies on a Sunday or in a bar. How can we bring that to television or the internet? How can we recreate that? And is that through podcasts or interview shows? Or again, like it's putting people, on screen that don't have a degree in broadcasting or all of that, because some of the most passionate sports fans didn't do that. They spent all their time just watching sports. And I think that's what we want to do at Follow Through is continue to just like embrace the unique perspective of the game.
It's very important because, as you are well aware as a writer, that storytelling aspect of trying to find compelling content, and it's almost the same way when you're doing video as well and trying to pivot to video.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I told my team is like last year isn't going to look like this year, and that's okay. Like, let's embrace the evolution of this thing. Like, because as much as we can do that, we'll be a company. You know what I mean? If we can keep up, if we can do a little bit of the experimenting, and then also continuing to figure out how to make the consistent stuff better every day. Like, if we hit those 2 points, we're going to be great. We're going to be in it for a long time.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I wish you, nothing but the best in, obviously you're still 1 year into the, just having started your own studio. And I'm sure there's many, many big things ahead of you. Before we go, I wanted to talk to you. You touched on your marriage with a fellow comedian. I found a very interesting article about how you met your wife, through meeting in Chicago, through Second City and everything. I wanted to ask you, about, marrying a fellow comedian, obviously a non-Asian one. And, we all know about the, the racism within our own community. And, what is kind of like the interracial marriage at a time like this, where I know people would probably give you the funny looks, even well before the pandemic and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because me and her, while we're different races, we're comedians, right? It's like we're like, oh, we're the same, but when you go out, you definitely get that looks. Like I was just thinking about this the other day. So my wife, she was doing a road gig, and I had to take her to the airport. And so I drove her to the airport, and of course, I got out. We were at the curb, and I got out and I got her bags, and I gave her bags. And I see everyone looking around, and and maybe I'm assuming things, but they were looking at me as if I was her Uber driver, right? Because my wife is a very beautiful, Irish, Midwestern woman from Indianapolis.
So you married up.
What's that? I definitely married. I mean, look at her. She's
absolutely,
gorgeous. Yeah. And then there's me. And I definitely was like, everyone thinks I'm her Uber driver. And so I gave her a big kiss, and I was like, now everyone thinks I'm a really good Uber driver. So, but you get those looks, and again, that's just, it's funny. It's 2022, and this still exists.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what worries me is like when I was a kid, I saw being Asian as a superpower, like truly, like as someone who wanted attention. And I grew up in Marshalltown, Iowa, and Erie, Pennsylvania. I was the only Asian kid in all my classes. I wanted the attention. I wanted people to go, oh my God, there's CJ. He's the only Asian kid. And I'd be like, yeah, look at me. Give me all the attention. I want to be different. But then and this is something that I only realized in the last few years. That's not the case for every kid out there. Some kids find it as a disadvantage.
Right.
And that's where society needs to help, and society needs to help. And also too, with immigrant parents coming over and not knowing that can be, the American culture. And so kids are supposed to be able to look up to the parents for that help. But when their parents don't understand that, as you know, I can say my parents didn't understand that yet at all either. They thought everything was great over here when they first got here. Like, oh, the opportunities are here. We're making so much more money than we did in our homeland. That's all that matters. Suck it up. And so I'm like, well, where do these kids have the support? And are they getting bullied and all that stuff? And that's what worries me. And you know, to me, I don't think I'm famous to be a role model for anyone, but I'm like, you know, I want to tell, you know, the Asian kids out there coming up, I'm like, embrace, you know, your heritage, embrace what makes you different. You know, almost just quiet the haters, really. And, you know, the thing is, like, you're different and, you know, live your life that way. This is an advantage when it comes down to it. And, you know, the rest of the world isn't really what your class full of just, you know, only white people is. The rest of the world is diverse. And it'll work out to your advantage as you get older. But yeah. It's yeah, I mean, that it's an ongoing, like, question in my head of, like, question and gratefulness that I was okay. And how can I make it better for future generations?
That's a great way to put it, CJ. And of course, as we are in Lunar New Year, and of course we embrace the hashtag very Asian here.
Yeah.
Anything special you've done for Lunar New Year?
I have not. No, I haven't. No, I haven't. Maybe that's something I need to do.
Okay.
Maybe I will. I will do it.
Okay. Well, we just wanted to put that out there. CJ Toledano, he is the head of creative at Follow Through. He founded the company. It's a year old. There's a lot of great content out there. We like to thank you for coming on. We're going to have you on again. You're
love to.
Fascinating stuff out there, and well, we want to discuss more about this great marriage to this that you have. So,
thank you.
As two comedians together, there's another great picture of you guys.
We have fun.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have you on. Thank you so much for coming on with us, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, CJ.
Take care.
Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
And the AA team will continue after this message.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Really understanding the difference between empowerment and agency versus objectification. And the difference is always who has the power. If I choose that I feel my best and I look my best and I'm the most confident in a certain outfit, then I am empowering myself to make that choice and to tell you that I'll show you who I am and let you know who I am. You can't make those decisions based off what I'm wearing. But if it's objectification because the producers or directors or whoever runs a show is saying you have to wear a dress every show and high heels have to be this high, and you have to dye your hair blonde, it's a very different thing, right? So I do think we have to remember that, because a lot of people will look at women who are stepping into their own sexuality and accuse them of not being also allowed to talk about harassment and other things. They're very different things. It's about choice and power.
The coaching, I both coached Griffin and Dylan in youth football, but that had just ended. It was Dylan's season had just ended, and when Griffin passed away, and so then, as I said, my mom, she had prior to Griffin passing away, though, it was a Mother's Day, actually the day after Mother's Day that very year, she found out she had stage 4 uterine cancer. And so she survived just a lethal surgery where they removed a lot. And so she somehow survived that, only to 8 months later pass away. And so there was kind of a rough time there where, for me, it felt like everybody was going, nobody was coming.
Yeah.
And so that led me to a serious bout of depression, to the point where in August of 2015, I actually shot myself. and in the head, underneath the chin, and with the intention of not being here. And so, as I look back now, everything I didn't have to live for, I now have to live for. And so it was just a period of time where life was tough. And it was, once you get down, what my experience is, once I got down that low, it didn't feel like it was ever going to end. And unless I ended it.
We're back on the AA team. And of course, during the break, you may have seen the promo for Peggy Kosinski's show here on the Barroom Network. We want to give her a plug because she has a new show coming up on ESPN 1000. It'll be on every Saturday. She'll be on with Dion Miller and Robert Federer, the great media critic who writes for the Chicago Sun-Times. He's going to he mentioned that they'll be on from 11 to 1 a.m. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. every Saturday. They'll both be on. And Peggy, who's just a sports media maven in Chicago, we want to give her a shout out and let mention about that. She's going to be doing a show on ESPN 1000, which is, of course, one of the sports media behemoths in Second City.
Absolutely. Peggy's been a long-time reporter. She also worked at the ESPN for a long time. I think a Barroom Network is very, very lucky to have her own show interviewing women working in the industry. And then Dion Miller is a rising star in the Chicago market at ABC7 Chicago, covering the Bears and other sports. So, I'm very curious to see how the show turns out, and hopefully it will turn into something great in the long run, for sure.
Absolutely. So we're rooting for both of them, and best of luck to Peggy and Dion as they start their new show. Stephen, let's talk about, while we're waiting for Derrick Ray, the great soccer announcer and the great soccer voice of the English Premier League, Bundesliga, and World Cup for NBC, Fox, and ESPN. Let's talk about a soccer-related story that's come up over the last week. Of course, that was the U.S. men's soccer team. They played in horrid conditions in Minnesota in a game against Honduras, which they won. You had to expect they would win. It was 2 degrees out there. I think the wind chill was minus 800. So it's just ridiculous to play the game. I understand what the United States Soccer Federation was trying to do, U.S. Soccer, saying that, okay, we want to recreate what Canada has done by playing in Edmonton in Tim Hortons Stadium, not Tim Hortons Stadium, but out in Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton. But really, you're endangering players and fans when you're going to be playing in 2-degree weather.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm a big soccer head. And, I was watching that game, from the very beginning, because the game against Canada was a absolute disaster.
Yeah.
And, watching that game, I was very, very nervous after what I saw, in a game against Canada. It was a horrid performance, Greg Berhalter made egregious comments about dominating the possession, and he was flabbergasted that they lost, despite dominating, which got the criticism of Stephen A. Smith and the interruption of both Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser, which unfortunately that's how mainstream media covers about the sports of soccer in this country, and obviously rightfully so. I was very nervous from the very, very get-go. I hated the idea of having to force both teams, to play in such horrid condition.
Right.
So, yeah, I watched it. It was not a pretty sight. A lot of fans were still filing into the stadium. At halftime, when the U.S. had a comfortable lead, Honduras players, I believe several of them, including the goalkeeper, suffered hypothermia and had to be replaced. So, it wasn't a pretty, U.S. managed to win, but again, I know a lot of people hated that idea, and I do remember back 8 years ago when U.S. was playing Costa Rica, I believe in January or March, around that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was a massive snowstorm that that both teams had to play, and the U.S. still managed to beat 1-0. Obviously, I get it. Home teams usually can pick and choose their venues, but a lot of people don't like the idea, and I certainly don't think that weather has to play a huge advantage in these matters. And I have to tell you, ESPN FC, they were debating about this, and if you have to rely on weather to get a competitive advantage, you're not that good at all. I know Craig Burley, the former Scottish international, and a very big critic of U.S. soccer, was very, very adamant about the idea. And, I agree to that. Craig Burley obviously doesn't really have anything nice to say about U.S. or U.S. soccer in particular, but obviously he made a good point about, the U.S. acting like a small country when it comes to these things. And it kind of underscores the USSF's, lack of efforts in trying to create more, fan base, even amongst the Latino fan base here in America, because they were so dead concerned about, maybe the stadium in warmer cities like California and Florida being flooded with the, Latino fans who were rooting for, Costa Rica, Mexico, of course, Panama and Honduras, El Salvador, something like that. So, if they can, if they're not doing their part, that kind of underscores the ineptness and incompetency that is the USSF.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree on that, Stephen. You're like I said, you're endangering fans, you're endangering players. When you have players being taken off the field because of hypothermia, those aren't conditions to be playing. That's not conducive for football and soccer. It is conducive for American football because that you want to have a home field advantage playing in winter, like Green Bay or Minnesota or even the Bears. But you just can't have that for soccer. That's just not conducive. It's not good for anybody. And I know we're the next group and the next round is going to be played in March, so we should see better weather for that, especially when the United States takes on Mexico in the Hex. The top three teams will advance. Canada, United States, and Mexico are 1, 2, 3 respectively. Panama's in fourth. We expect to see some interesting play in the next round, the fourth round, but still, I was really concerned for some of the players, especially when you're playing outdoors in Minnesota. If you're going to play at US Bank Stadium in an enclosed space under a dome, and you're in a controlled environment there, that's one thing. And of course, you're also going to be worried about playing on the artificial surface there as well, which is not good for soccer either. But still, it would be a much better environment playing in that than having players being taken out due to hypothermia.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a lot of players on U.S. men's national team who are playing overseas, who had to make a long trek, having played the game shortly before the the January camp and January game happened, and you have a lot of MLS players who are not even in a regular season form yet, and then Greg Berhalter threw a lineup of players who are in shape, and yet relying on MLS players who are not even in shape, and then risking their health in such a terrible health, and it really bears watching, because to me, they made a colossal mistake in their lineup against Canada that they could have at least gotten a point out of and made it a lot easier. So the March camp obviously is the last of their qualifier at Mexico to start, a game against Panama at home, and then a game against Costa Rica. The road games are obviously, Mexico and Costa Rica. U.S. have not had a lot of success, and obviously I am a little nervous, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that a lot of guys will be healthy, and that obviously much better weather condition in March. Hopefully the U.S. will be well on their way qualifying to Qatar.
And of course, Azteca Stadium, one of the most hostile arenas in the world, not just for the United States, but for any team that goes there. Of course, That's going to transition us to our next guest. Derrick Ray is a broadcaster, a fantastic broadcaster, has called the Bundesliga for ESPN, English Premier League, which has been seen on NBCSN, the late great NBCSN, we should say. Also called Olympic Soccer for NBC. Also called the Olympic World Cup Soccer for Fox, and both on the women's and the women's side. Derrick, it is great. It's a great pleasure to finally talk with you. We followed each other on Twitter. I'm glad to have you on the AA team.
Well, Ken and Stephen, thank you very much for the invitation. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Derrick. It's been a pleasure. We follow each other, all of us on Twitter, and been working to have you on for quite some time now. But so we are really, really excited to finally have you on our show. My very first question, obviously, is, you're a Scotsman living in Massachusetts, correct?
Correct.
And you are a bona fide American citizen as of, is it true?
Technically speaking, I am, yes. I'm an American citizen. I'm a UK citizen. But I think of myself as somebody who in normal times would bounce around the world rather than having an allegiance to either.
What's the biggest difference working for a network in UK versus the working for a US network? Because I remember you left ESPN and then you came back several years ago. Tell us about the differences and what made you kind of wanting to come back to the States.
That's a great question. I've actually never been asked it, so I appreciate it. I think when I think back to 2009, there was a lot going on in my mind, because at that point, ESPN had just lost the rights to the UEFA Champions League, which was very much my bread and butter. I'd been the lead voice, and Fox were to take over the rights. And so I was left with a bit of a decision to make. What did I want to do? Now, I could have stayed with ESPN in the USA, but at that time, maybe conveniently for me, ESPN was on the verge of starting up a new UK operation. And that had to do with rights as well, because Setanta had just essentially gone into insolvency, you would say. And so ESPN stepped in and took over their UK rights, and they had to put it all together in a short space of time. So I was approached with the idea that it might be good for ESPN and it might be interesting for me to go back home to work in the UK on ESPN's rights in the UK. And conveniently, as a Scotsman, they had Scottish football as well as English football. So it was really perfect for me. And I kind of felt I had some unfinished business, if you like, in the UK, because I'd left very young. I'd been at the BBC as a young broadcaster for 5 years with huge opportunities to cover the sport I love around Europe. But like a lot of young people, I was quite restless. And so I'd jumped at the chance to move to the USA initially, actually, to be one of the press officers for the World Cup Organizing Committee ahead of the 1994 tournament. And from there, I went back into broadcasting with ESPN after the tournament was finished. So it's a long-winded answer, but I really wanted that chance to work back home. And you hinted at this in your question, in a different kind of environment. Because remember, I've been broadcasting essentially to a world audience, but this was really in the days before social media, not having a lot of contact with that world audience. And we never really were sure how many people were watching and listening. Obviously, the games were going to the USA as well when it came to the Champions League. But to be honest, I wanted to be back in an environment where it really mattered, where you had the daily buzz and the daily feedback, sometimes bad, it's not always good feedback when you're in an environment like that. But I think it would be fair to say that in 2009, the game hadn't evolved in the USA the way it has now. I think younger people now are much more aware of football, as I call it, soccer, as they might call it. And so we were still in that period in 2009 where it was trying to kick on. And, the Premier League wasn't on NBC at that point. It was on Fox, and it was also to be on ESPN. And I helped out with a few of the productions from the UK side when I was based in London. So that's really where it came from. I wanted to be in the market, or in a market where, it was as big as the Red Sox are where I live now, and I'd experienced that for a couple of decades. And, nothing against the Red Sox. They're a great team. And, I live amongst people who absolutely, live and die with the Red Sox. But I was getting a little bit tired of the fact that I was working with a minority sport in the USA, and I wanted to be part of the majority sport. So that's really where that came from. And as you mentioned, I did leave ESPN because essentially ESPN didn't keep that channel going after a few years, and I was approached by BT Sport to go and work for them, amongst other broadcasters. So I did that until 2017. And then we decided that for our own reasons, we wanted to come back. We never sold our house here in Massachusetts. And my wife is from Massachusetts and a very proud Bostonian. And so we made the move to come back. But really, it sort of opened new doors for me, because I realized as a pure freelancer that I could then essentially go and work for, not everybody, because they all have to want you. But I had the opportunity to go and do the World Cup for Fox and the Women's World Cup for Fox, to jump into NBC as a fill-in host on their Premier League coverage, to even try my hand at the NFL for Prime, because they came up with the idea that they wanted
awesome. That's right.
They wanted a British sound to the NFL. So we did that for 3 years.
Nice.
And I've also, since 2018, really, I've been one of the voices on the FIFA video game as a commentator. So I've gone from being really a pure ESPN man back in the day to then going to the UK to being mostly ESPN, doing some other things, then BT Sport and some other things, to now being completely freelance. And, I love my broadcasting life on that basis.
Well, as someone, I know the Barroom Network is based in Chicago, Derrick, but as a Rhode Islander living south of you, one of these days we got to get together and get a pint together. We have to do that. So.
Sounds like a plan. Well, I love Rhode Island, and I haven't been there so much recently. In the pandemic, I think our lives have changed in terms of where we go and things like that. But no, Rhode Island is beautiful, especially the coastline. So yeah, I'll take you up on that, Ken.
Absolutely. You come down, we'll have clam cakes together. How's that?
You're on.
One thing that people don't realize about the ESPN, and as someone who's covered sports media, that Rebecca Lowe was part of your network at ESPN UK.
Oh yeah,
along with, of course, some of the great voices you had over there. So, and of course, it was to that where NBC, when they finally got the rights, needed a host. They got Rebecca and got her to move over, and now she's beloved here in the United States, I think, more than she is in the UK. So
well, I'm glad you brought that one up, because if you go back to the start of ESPN UK, and I hadn't really thought of this until now. So you had Rebecca, you had John Champion, who of course people know as the voice of MLS on ESPN now, among many other things. And I was part of that as well. You had Ian Dark doing bits and pieces, mostly for the US audience, actually, as the commentator for ESPN US on the Premier League. And you had many other terrific broadcasters. Ray Stubbs, another one who's maybe not so well known in the US, but will have appeared from time to time, who's a very good friend of mine. And so they were great days, because we felt we were pioneers, if you like. We were starting a brand new channel, and nobody had the foggiest idea how it was going to go and how well it was going to be received. And I think there was a bit of an early stigma. Oh, it's just going to be a bunch of Americans coming into the UK who don't know anything about the market. And of course, there weren't really any Americans. It was actually fairly established UK broadcasters who had been brought in, but the idea was to have kind of an American style in terms of the look and maybe bring some graphic elements. And it was a great team, a small team to work with. And in that sense, it was sort of a contrast to what I'd experienced with ESPN in the US, because we all know how big Bristol, Connecticut is, or at least how big the campus is there, and this was the opposite. It was a much smaller setup in West London.
Yeah, absolutely. And every once in a while, ESPN here in the US would show that ESPN UK production. So we got to see Rebecca Lowe for a little bit. She also hosted a little bit of the US Women's World Cup in Berlin. And then finally got hired here. Now, as I mentioned, she's so beloved here. I don't think anybody can imagine anybody hosting the Premier League.
And I'll tell you a story about that. I remember sitting with Rebecca during the Euros. When would it have been? 2012, Euro 2012. And at that point, we both kind of had a sixth sense that the ESPN UK operation was going to end. And I vividly remember sitting at the bar with Rebecca, and we were just sort of wondering what was going to come next. And we were both clueless as to what was going to come next. And, it wasn't sort of a conversation about, woe is us, what is going to happen? It was kind of, it looks as though there's going to be a new chapter, whatever it is. And I had no idea at that point that, and she probably didn't either, that NBC might be in her future. And I certainly didn't know that I was bound for BT Sport, but it's the nature of our business. It's a very fractious business, and people think it's so glamorous, and we sort of all just swan from one broadcaster to another. But it's not quite as straightforward as that, I'd have to say.
Well, thank you for sharing the memories of your work in the UK and the US. Before we had you on, Ken and I were having some discussions on the U.S. men's national team having to play at Minneapolis in the frigid conditions, and players from Honduras suffering, hypothermia and had to be replaced at halftime and all of that stuff. And I was kind of bemoaning the gross incompetency of the USSF, wanting to hold events at such a terrible condition for. Which do no justice for neither teams, obviously. What is your honest take on, the USSF, the current version of USMNT, and obviously, of course, MLS, and the perception from, the UK standpoint?
Well, I'll deal with the first part of the question first. I think this was almost an experiment that got out of hand with regard to St. Paul, Minnesota. I think that the US soccer people had looked at what they had done and the success they'd had by going to colder venues at colder times of the year, and it perhaps being a 12th man, if you like, specifically Columbus, Ohio. Sure. And, so I get all that, but I think that you do have to look at what the sort of the end consequences of a decision like that. And I, don't live in Minnesota, but as we've discussed, I live in Massachusetts, and I know how cold it gets in Massachusetts. And I know, frankly, how ridiculous it would be to be playing an international match in Foxborough, Massachusetts right about now. You really are at the mercy of the weather. We had an ice storm last week. We had a huge snowstorm the week before, as Ken knows. And, Minnesota is even more severe. So, there was always the danger it was going to be like this. And I think, you're thinking you're playing against a team like Honduras that is not going to be at all familiar with these conditions. But I have to be honest, and you asked for my honest answer, so I'll give it to you. Watching it as a spectator, a very interested spectator last week, I had a hard time with it. I was just watching the way the ball was moving, and that wasn't natural. It wasn't skimming along the surface. It was
bouncy too. Yeah,
it was that bouncy sort of bobbly surface because of the firmness of the pitch, because it couldn't be anything other than firm. And what came through to me as well was, this was meant to be a really sort of big, lively, up-tempo night for the US, but the crowd sounded quiet. And I communicated
Yeah,
with
it was.
a few fans after the game who said, "Yeah, we were quiet because we were freezing cold."
Yeah.
And when it's as low as that temperature wise, you have such things as frostbite warnings. We have them in our neck of the woods here as well. Don't stay outside for long. But be very careful about that. And I think we're well accustomed to the dangers of things like heat stroke, the things like playing in conditions that are overly hot. I remember the 1994 World Cup, Jack Charlton, the then manager of the Republic of Ireland, just losing his marbles over Ireland having to play in the conditions they did in Orlando at around lunchtime in horrendous conditions for football, temperature over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And, that was rightly criticized. So I think if we're going to say that is rightly criticized, we can also level criticism against what we saw in Minneapolis. Now, the US got the result, but as we know, a couple of Honduran players had to go off because of the cold, because of, as we were told, hypothermia, and that's no laughing matter,
Yeah.
So I think that you can have a home advantage without going to those extremes. And I do think that lessons will have been learned. I do think that there'll be people who will say, yeah, okay, that did go a little bit too far. That wasn't what we were really trying to achieve. I think they were trying to achieve, conditions that were maybe close to freezing, which would still have the effect of not being great for Honduras and would help the USA. But hopefully never again. Hopefully they return to Minnesota because it's a great state, a great stadium, but preferably in June rather than in the depths of winter.
Derrick, I see the headset on. You're used to calling games, especially throughout the years, in a studio, off a monitor. But with COVID, how has that changed? I mean, have you had to call games from home rather than going to ESPN or going to another generic studio and having to call the games?
It's been a big mixture, actually. You're right. I wear this headset rather a lot and have done over the last 2 years. And we quickly realized with the video game, first of all, that we needed to come up with a different setup because typically I'd go into a studio, we'd record for a few days. But in the early part of the pandemic, that wasn't possible. It wasn't an easy case of saying, I'm going to go into a studio and do what I've always done. So, just kind of behind the wall behind me, we have a proper audio setup. I found the smallest room in the house that has the best acoustics, and that is my home broadcast studio. And that's had a lot of use over the last 2 years with the FIFA game, the different editions of the FIFA game, but also with the Bundesliga for the world feed, because I do a lot of the world feeds that are done in English. So you'll get that on ESPN Plus, but also in many other countries, because just like the Premier League, the Bundesliga has its own English language world feed. And so I do that from the studio in there as well. We've had to all adapt. I think everybody in every walk of life has had to adapt. And, I won't lie to you. There are some benefits from it as well. Rather than having to get in my car and maybe drive 2 or 3 hours, I can roll out of bed and go into my little studio and broadcast from there. So, and that works great. But there are times, of course, when I have to be at ESPN, and I'm actually on the verge of my first long trip for quite a while, coming up in a couple of weeks. So we'll see how that goes. But we've all been adapting.
Have you talked with Fox about going to Qatar, or have they made any plans about Qatar coming up this year?
I'm not at liberty to say anything about the World Cup. All I'll say is I did the last one and loved it, working for the Fox team. But time will tell in terms of their announcements.
Okay, we'll wait on that then. Well, I thank you at least giving us an answer.
Sure.
Let's talk about Bundesliga. You called the game for a long time. You're very, very fluent in German. I follow your Twitter handle because obviously I've lived in Frankfurt for several years. I followed the Eintracht Frankfurt. We had a little bit of interaction on that side before. Yes. There have been many Americans who have made the journey to Bundesliga, which is not unusual. Even well before then, in the 90s, German Americans obviously made their marks, and now it seems like a lot of Americans have made their transition to Bundesliga and been successful. Christian Pulisic, obviously, the most successful one so far. Why Americans have been so coveted and have been somewhat decent in the Bundesliga, in your opinion?
I think there are many factors to that one, Stephen. I think we could probably go back a number of years and look at Americans anyway playing in Germany, maybe not at that highest level, but there were always one or two, who going back to the days of Eric Wijnaldum, when he was in Germany, and Connor Casey, another one who landed there. And I've always been told by coaches in Germany that Americans they're very good students. So they tend to come and really want to work and they want to learn. And they generally don't expect too much. At least this was the previous generation. Now, maybe it's changed with the new generation. They're going there with an opportunity. They see it as, if you like, their first ticket to Europe, because it's very clear, and I didn't properly answer your question about MLS earlier because we were talking about Minnesota. But if you go back to the earlier days of MLS, it was a different league back then. And there wasn't this focus on going to Europe at a young age. Players would even complete college. What a concept that is nowadays for footballers in the USA, but they would complete college and then go and play in MLS, starting at the age of 21 or 22. That's not happening now, so that the players who have ability, and obviously they're being encouraged by their parents and by their coaches, they are seeing that, if they do well in the MLS academies, then at the age of, 17, 18, they are going to potentially attract the attention of Bundesliga clubs. Somebody like George Bello, who's just gone to Arminia Bielefeld. So I think it's two things. It's knowledge of that market by the American players and their agents and their advisors, but knowledge of that market by the Bundesliga clubs. And they all have specialists in Germany whose full-time job it is to monitor what's happening in a country like the USA. And I think the MLS academies are, certainly getting much better. I think the quality of player is getting better. And I think it's just a good fit. In Germany, they talk a lot about, the verb passen, which means literally to fit, to match. And I think that's what we have, is we have a good match between the vision of young American players, where they see themselves, what they want to do in terms of the education process, and the German clubs who really are constructed upon young players who they can polish, diamonds that can be polished, if you like, if you think of that concept, and then eventually sold on, because that is the business model. It's a sustainable business model in Germany. You improve a player and you sell him on. So I think it'll continue to work for quite some time.
Awesome perspective. I definitely would like to see more, successful Americans, especially at a younger age, make a jump to Europe. Not all of them are going to be successful. For every Christian, Pulisic of the world, there are obviously several others who have fallen through the cracks. And but obviously, in order for the U.S. to continue to make their way to be more competitive in the world, obviously, places like Bundesliga would be a perfect place to get their craft going there, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think you might dream of England, and it's natural that these young players are dreaming of England because we've spoken about it earlier. NBC do a fabulous job with the coverage; it's front and center. But I think there's also a realization that it's pretty pointless going to a Premier League club at a young age as an American. Because realistically, what are you going to do? You're going to go there. You're going to be, far away from the first team. You're not going to be involved in that at all. You're going to have a difficult time even getting close to the first team. So maybe if you're lucky, you go out on loan. But why do that when you can sort of, cut out that middleman, go to Germany, know that you have a better chance of getting first team football? Yeah, granted, you've got some cultural things that you've got to adapt to, a new language for one. And yeah, you do have to go through that, but you'll be given time to adapt, just as Joe Scally, the American, was when he went to Borussia Mönchengladbach. So I think all these things, all these roads for the American player at the moment lead to the Bundesliga.
Okay. You think the U.S. will qualify for the Qatar?
I do, yes. I do think they will. I mean, it's a bit tighter than maybe a lot of people want, but I'll be surprised if they fail. I know they've got 2 difficult away games and then Panama at home. But no, I'll be surprised at this stage if they make it. I mean, I think that it probably should have been more comfortable than it actually has been, because if you think about it, this is a poor Mexico. This is not Mexico at the very best. So, they've sort of, when you look at the competition there, they've not had to really fear Mexico the way they might have done a few years ago. Canada, very good. I think it's great for CONCACAF that Canada have improved. But I think the other teams are poorer. I think Costa Rica are poorer than they were. Yeah. Panama, really, Panama, an old team as well. And then you look at, El Salvador, Honduras. I don't think it's a stellar edition of CONCACAF. And, I don't like this expression "golden generation" about the USA. It doesn't sit well.
I know you were very, very hypercritical of that.
I just think it's, first of all, why would you say that? Because all it does is put pressure on your players. But secondly, to me, a golden generation, that generation has to actually have achieved something, and you could say, the potential generation, then great. To me, that's a good fit in terms of the language. But golden generation, no, not yet. They're mostly young players who are still trying to find their way. And, but based on the potential that they have, I think it should have been a bit easier. But no, I think the USA will be in Qatar.
A couple more questions with Derrick Ray from ESPN. Derrick, I wanted to talk about, football, racism in football.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a hotbed issue. I do have, an article that was posted, the Celtics manager, Anjay Polito. Yeah, I'm sure you're probably familiar with that one. And I'm not trying to, single out, Scotland, your native country. Obviously, UK as a whole has had its issues, of course. And I remember FIFA chairman Gianni Infantino made some really racist comments about having the reason to have World Cup every 2 years is so that, Africans and immigrants won't be crossing the Mediterranean or something like that. Obviously, you probably are aware of, the comments made by Celtics manager in answering questions about the Japanese players that was signed recently. What are your overall thoughts on the the racism in football, not just in UK, but also it's the racism. Obviously, having lived in the US for a long time yourself, you see it everywhere. The city of Boston has had terrible history and reputation, and all that kind of stuff. What is your overall perspective of the racism in football and everything?
Well, I think not just in football, as a world, we still have an awful lot to learn, and we're learning every day. And I think it's an educational process for a lot of people. And, football, if you like, is a cross-section of society, and that means the good and the bad. And unfortunately, in football, we do get a lot of the bad. And I obviously, as somebody who would say he is a caring citizen of the world, because it's the way I see myself, and I love cultures. To me, that is what makes the world go round. The fact that if I go to Japan, the culture is distinctly different. If I go to Germany, people know that I'm always have been very much in love with German culture. No matter where I go, I try to imbibe that culture, and I see it as something to cherish. So I've never understood this idea that you denigrate somebody else's culture, which is what somebody who you would say is a racist is doing. I think we can all, as people who try to care and try to help, we can all do our bit, but there are always going to be educational aspects that are necessary. Now, you asked me about Ange Postecoglou. I thought his statement was brilliant. I think the journalist who asked the question wasn't trying to be disrespectful with the question. I think there is a tendency in football, and I think we've all been guilty. I have probably been guilty of it as a commentator. There is a tendency in football to come up with stereotypes for every nation, for every country. I mean, the country I come from, you'll still have people saying, "Oh yeah, they're just long ball merchants. They just play kick and rush football. Those Scots, they don't know how to play football. It's more like rugby." I've had that said to me. Now, I could take that as offensive. It is pretty offensive because, I think Scots try to play football as much as anybody else. We're not as good at it as, say, Brazil or Argentina or France or Germany, but we're a small country. But, so I think the stereotype, of course, in this case was that Ange Postecoglou, who used to coach in Japan, has signed all these Japanese players. And, he was asked to expand on that. And the answer he gave was a very good one. He said, well, just be careful by saying I've signed Japanese players. I've signed 4 individuals who happen to be from Japan, and, just as, somebody from Japan or of Japanese descent has his own personality, so do I, as a Scot, have my own personality, and it's distinctly different from somebody from, from the next town over from me who's my age and maybe with my upbringing. We're all individuals, even though we have that common cultural background. But I think it's a reminder what he said, Ange. It's a reminder that we do have to watch our words all the time, and we have to watch our feelings about things like this, because, to be honest, it's the reason why one of the things I really try very hard to do is to get pronunciations spot on. Of names from all cultures, because to me that's the ultimate respect, is to say a name. For example, I was doing a Japanese player who I have terrific respect for, 38-year-old Makoto Hasebe, from Eintracht Frankfurt, and I try to say it as close. I don't speak Japanese, but I try to say it in a way that if a Japanese person is watching, that he or she will go, okay, that commentator has done his homework. At least I can hear that. And so it comes down to respect. And, as Ange said, he has run into many different Scots and they're all different. So, let's just be careful.
Here's a comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Derrick, of course, we, as someone who has called the World Cup, one thing that, as Stephen mentioned, is that FIFA's thinking about going every 2 years. It's not cemented in stone yet, and also going to 48 teams. What is your thought about playing once every 2 years, and also the possibility of expansion and just playing two group games?
Well, I come at this from maybe a different angle than some. First of all, I'm not in favor of the every 2 years. I think that. I think that, I go back to, was born in the late 60s. First World Cup I can remember was 1974. And I can remember every World Cup. And I can remember pretty much every game I've watched in every World Cup. That's maybe odd, but of course it is my business. But I can think of friends, who are not in the business who would be the same. If I said, 1982 World Cup, remember that group that Italy were in with Peru and Poland and Cameroon? Oh yeah, all those draws, and then Italy went on and won it. You remember all that. If all of a sudden we go to every 2 years, I think we've lost all that. And I think the World Cup should be special. It should be something that we put on a pedestal. And to me, that we're not going to be doing that if it becomes something that's just every 2 years. And then I confidently predict that one of these days, without irony, we would say, the last World Cup, that's when country X decided to play a B team or a C team, And, it's a bit like what happened with the FA Cup in England many years ago when that started getting downgraded. Before, it was unthinkable to be playing B teams, but now it happens routinely. I think it would happen with the World Cup if we had it every 2 years. But what I would say is I actually am not against expanding the World Cup in terms of the number of countries who take part in it. And again, I say that as somebody who's been a bit wounded by the process, coming from a country like Scotland that used to routinely qualify for every World Cup in my youth, 1974, 78, 82, 86, 90, missed 94, alas, but made it in 1998. hasn't made it since, because Europe has got so devilishly difficult to get out of. I think that's a fact. I think you'd look at countries, middle ranking countries from Europe, and you would probably say, are they on a level with a country like Japan? You'd probably say, yeah, they are. They are. Japan probably benefits from being in Asia, where it's a big power within Asia.
Sure.
For example, if Japan were in Europe, would they qualify for every World Cup? I don't know that they would. I think they would sometimes, but I don't think they would every time. So, trying to be fair-minded about it. And then you have Africa, for example, that is underrepresented. I think there's no doubt Africa is underrepresented. I think, CONCACAF, again, we spoke about the USA. CONCACAF, I'm not going to say is overrepresented, but it's a bit easier to qualify from CONCACAF for a country like the USA and a country like Mexico. As we said, this is not a good Mexico team, but they're probably still going to qualify. I don't think they would necessarily in a more difficult part of the world. So you know what I'm saying? I think it would be in order to expand the World Cup. That's where I would go with it. I would say more teams, no problem with that at all, but let's keep it once every 4 years.
Absolutely. One thing we would be remiss in not mentioning, we talked about a little bit beforehand, but you're now the voice of the FIFA video game, taking over for the legendary Martin Tyler.
Yeah.
How have you enjoyed calling the video game?
It's great fun, Ken. It's a different kind of discipline. It's probably not what people imagine because, of course, I'm not doing it live. We're essentially, if you think about it this way, it's a bit like, with the ice skating, you have the free program that's wonderfully flamboyant. That's more like what we do on a week-to-week basis in commentary on a game. But then you have this other thing with ice skating called technical merit, these little sort of technical exercises. That's more what it's like with the video game, because, of course, I'm not doing anything live, but I'm trying to have everything technically good so that it can live up to being live when it does go live, or at least as close as possible to that. And, I'm not watching video when I'm doing it. I'm pulling things out of my brain and my imagination. It's sort of the theater of the mind when I'm doing it. And the producers, it's a great team I work with. They'll give me scenarios, and it's up to me to come up with as many unique ways of conveying that scenario. So it's a different kind of discipline. And we do very much work as a team, and it's not lost on me the magnitude of the game around the world and the iconic nature of FIFA to so many people, particularly the generation that's younger than my one.
Yeah, absolutely. Derrick Ray, I can talk to you for hours. And the fact that now I know you're in Massachusetts, we got to, like I said, you have an open invitation, come to Rhode Island, and we'll have some clam cakes together and have a pint. And hope we can do that when your schedule allows it. So
we'll have to have the red Rhode Island clam chowder.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Massachusetts clam chowder. Yeah.
When it gets a little bit warmer and we don't have to deal with ice storms, we can definitely do that. Derrick Ray, announcer for the Bundesliga, called the World Cup, Olympic soccer, the English Premier League, Scottish Premier League, just about any league you can imagine at this point. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will again have you on down the line. Thank you so much for joining the AA team tonight.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Take care.
And the AA team will continue after this.
Hey everybody, it's Aldo Gandhi, and I just want to let you know really quickly that our swag shop is reopened. DeepDishTees.com is where you go, and that's tees with T-E-E-S. Clever name, guys. They're the new home of our merchandise. You can get t-shirts, you can get caps, you can get coffee mugs, you can get hoodies, you can get all sorts of good stuff, and you'll help out the bar room with the purchase. So head over to DeepDishTees.com.
We'd like to thank our guests today. Stephen, again, fantastic job in getting the guests today. Derrick Ray, I can listen to him for hours. He can read the phone book. Those of you who may remember what the phone book was, those viewers. But I could definitely, if he actually wants to read Craigslist listings, I could definitely hear that, listen to that for just about hours. And of course, CJ Tolodano, great guest as well. We like to thank both of them for coming on tonight.
Absolutely. Another great show. Our show wouldn't be, where we are without the great guests and great conversations. So we want to thank our guests tonight, and we have more great guests lined up for you. In our next show and even beyond that too. So we've booked up some nice guests all the way into the month of March, and we're definitely going to keep everybody interested and hope to gain more followers and interest going forward as well.
Yes, and you can see the crawl below us of some of the guests that will be coming on in the next few weeks here on the Double A team. The last thing we want to discuss. We discussed, of course, is the Super Bowl, which will be played this Sunday at SoFi Stadium in I shouldn't say Los Angeles. It's Inglewood, California. Residents of Inglewood will always get on my case for not saying that properly. The last show we had on, I said San Francisco and Cincinnati. You said Los Angeles and Kansas City. We got it. We both got it half right.
Half right.
We both got it half right. We have Los Angeles and Cincinnati playing in the Super Bowl. Should be exciting. Should be quite interesting. Let's do our picks. Who are you choosing, Stephen?
Well, I'm in Columbus and Ohio, and obviously, it's heavily slanted towards Browns, but obviously there are still, a decent amount of Bengals fans in this area. And, the Bengals obviously gives a lot of Bears fans hope. I tweeted a while ago, if Mike Brown, the notoriously cheap owner and, gets a lot of flack and deservingly so, can go to Super Bowl with the Bengals, I tell you, the Bears, even with George and Virginia McCaskey, have a legitimate shot at going to Super Bowl in a not too distant future, I hope. But I tell you, home team hosting the Super Bowl again, Tampa Bay a year ago, and now Los Angeles. I tell you, as much as I'd like to root for the Bengals here in Ohio, I think the Rams have a better defense. Obviously, playing at home in SoFi. They do have, advantages that, I can't ignore too much. I think the pressure is definitely on the Rams to get it done. I'm going to say Rams will win this one 34-31, and I believe Stafford will win the MVP.
Okay. I'm going to agree with that. I think the Rams are built for now. Matthew Stafford wasn't brought in to win later. He was brought in to win now. That's why the Rams decided to trade Jared Goff to Detroit to get Matthew Stafford. They also brought on Von Miller from the Denver Broncos, a man who has played in a Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl. They also have Aaron Donald, who has the bitter taste of the last Super Bowl the Rams were in and losing to the New England Patriots in an absolutely horrendous Super Bowl that the Patriots won 13-3.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that while the Bengals are built for the future, and yes, they did get and defeat a Kansas City Chiefs team, which I think did more to play to lose that game rather than play to win. The Bengals took advantage of that and managed to come back from an 18-point deficit to win the game, and they deserve to win that game, by the way.
Right.
I will say the Rams will win this game. I will say they will win 34-20. I think that offensive line by the Cincinnati Bengals, which we saw against the Tennessee Titans back in Wild Card Weekend, they didn't play very well, and also managed to get Joe Burrow sacked 9 times. They despite that, they defeated the Tennessee Titans, which were the number 1 seed, the divisional round. I'm going to have to pick the Los Angeles Rams, and I think that with the Cooper Kupp and also OBJ and the weapons that Matthew Stafford has to throw, and plus they're playing at home again, I'm going to say that's going to be the advantage the Rams will need. They're the home team, even though they'll be technically the visiting team in the Super Bowl. They'll be going there. They get to sleep at home. They get to take the same familiar route to the game. I don't think they're going to be having to suffer that much, while the Bengals, of course, having to travel a couple of time zones. I'm going to say the Rams will win by 14. So that's my pick.
Okay, we'll wait and see for the Super Bowl, and we're really excited about this one. The halftime show is going to be also great, and we'll come back and talk about it in 2 weeks, obviously, and look back at the Super Bowl and any other interesting news. Maybe the latest development on the Brian Flores lawsuit. As well as if there's going to be any breakthrough in the negotiations for baseball, among other things that we can keep an eye out on, and we look forward to coming back here again, same time in 2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah, and by that time, the Olympics will be. I believe the Olympics will be over by that time, so we can discuss the closing ceremony and anything else that happened in the developments in the last over the last the glorious days, the 17 days or 16 days or whatever they have at the Olympics. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight, and thank you for joining us on the Barroom Network. He is Stephen Negishi. I am Ken Fang for our producer Aldo Gandia. Thank you once again to CJ Tolodano and Derrick Ray, our guests. Follow them on Twitter, follow their content, and thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks on the AA team here on the Barroom Network.
Good night.
Thank you.